The first paper, we have two discussants, Alex and Anne. I will start with the input from Alex. You have like 4 minutes so as to make a little bit also of discussion.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. All right, so you've heard the presentation of this paper from Holger. It's basically reporting on a piece of current hot off the press research from the Pathways Project, which is working on combining these three different approaches: integrated assessment modelling, MLP and socio-technical transitions approach, and initiative-based learning. And I think it's a really interesting and novel paper, and hopefully you saw that in the presentation. It's presented in the spirit of being a kind of first tentative exploration of how to bring these three things together, and I think taking in that sense, it's a good first step. So in a slightly different meeting, I could kind of focus some comments on, I mean, I have some experience in each of these three areas myself over the years, so I'd be quite happy to give detailed comments and reflections on the business of integrating these three different approaches. But I don't think that's quite this meeting. So I want to just make a comment about reflexivity and where we're going in this sort of research endeavour. So the unease, if you like, I have about the whole project is that there still seems to me to be a kind of implicit assumption that the integrated assessment model can provide a kind of a rational analysis of the state of the world codified in a computer simulation model that then can provide information about the required societal targets if we're to avoid problem A, problem B, whatever. And that by bringing these three approaches together, you can somehow more effectively inform local initiatives, and they can then make better real-world decisions based upon this analysis. But we know, STS and social science over the last kind of 20 years has made it very clear that in between the equations in the integrated assessment model is a whole worldview. And if we say, what do we mean by worldview? Well, the answer to that is it depends how deep the transformation process is that you think you're going through, because you need a conception of worldview that is deep enough to cover the depths of transformation that you think you're going through. And so then that kind of brings me to the local initiatives that you're trying to bring in through the initiative-based learning. What about the theories of change? Coming back to the topic of this meeting, what about the theories of change and perception of the world and worldviews that these initiatives hold? How does that fit with this scheme? Do these local initiatives have explicit or implicit theories of change? And is there a possibility that they may be different in significant ways from the theories of change which are embodied in these three different approaches that you have, in particular in the integrated assessment modelling? And if that is the case, then how do you deal with the competing truth claims inherent in that? How do you deal with these different ontologies? How do we as researchers confront that? So I think that the trend here is that we are making a switch from thinking that we can inform local actors and local initiatives to engaging and interacting, and this means engaging with the theories of change that actors hold, because it's reasonable to kind of hypothesize that their theories of change that they hold are the most important thing in informing their real-world decision-making, not the integrated assessment model. And so how can you set up a kind of deeper dialogue between the fundamental assumptions and theories of change that are held in the integrated assessment model and the local initiatives? And of course, you mentioned in your presentation how what you found out in the first part of your research project is the deep difficulty in really understanding and communicating with each other across those three approaches. But I suggest that the real challenge is, yes, to do that, but then to also bring in a dialogue with the initiatives themselves and understand the differences in language and assumptions there.
Yeah. So yes, thanks for that interesting paper, and I really like also this explorative approach of combining different methods. That's always really interesting to seek links between the disciplines. And one thing I already commented about is that you chose the Dutch land use sector as a case study. So it's a very interesting case study in the sense that it's a very densely populated area. And we had a discussion over lunch whether you can call it rural anyway, or whether all Netherlands is actually urban. It makes a good test case maybe also for future landscapes because of this urban focus. So what maybe you could highlight a bit more is what is the specialty of that case study and where actually where it needs to shift to. What is, I mean, you highlight that a bit with the image model, taking that as a sort of frame, showing some pathways that the image model gives you. But to which state does the Dutch sector actually need to shift to be sustainable? That was something that was left open a bit, I think. And then I guess my major suggestion is, and I'm not sure whether that's possible. An idea. I think in your presentation, in the very beginning, you sort of highlighted that the direct linkage between these approaches is very difficult, and you sort of described in a bit separate way. And then in the last slide, which was the interesting slide with all the arrows of combination, you tried to bring it together in the end. And I was wondering whether there's still some opportunity or some chance of more direct linkages, of really feeding results from this multi-level perspective analysis into the image model and back, and from the case studies to the other approaches. That would make it much more exciting, and I think maybe some very surprising results could come out of it. I was wondering whether the final picture with the linkages you find and the conclusions out of your comparison could have been made without the case study. Whether the case study was just a confirmation of these findings. So maybe something more surprising would come out, something you wouldn't have expected if we include direct links. And yes, the case study that this I'm not sure whether I remember it correctly, but this case study from the Netherlands, it's a very interesting case. And maybe it's an example of an embedded case study. Maybe it might be useful to take up some of these structures that the arts project has defined, which I really like, these 5 different formalizations of initiatives. Maybe it could be sort of framed in this sense of it. It's a nice, maybe it is an example of an embedded initiative. Are there other examples which could give more insight into this approach, or why did you choose this one? Is it particularly representative? That was something a bit open still, and I think it could profit from highlighting more of these interesting cases. Yes, but just see if I just quickly ran through my notes. Yes, I think that was a major point. Thanks.
But you have, see if we keep time, you have time for you to respond. But we don't have long time, so we have a group of 2 minutes.
Okay. So first of all, thank you both for this input. I think it's very helpful. First of all, I don't think we are... So it's not our goal to fit this into the initiatives like you should do this or that. So that's not within our scope. So if we get lucky, then maybe we have some ideas to give back. But then most of the case studies that we analyzed are not participatory, so we are not in direct managing contact in that way. It's more like to find out if we have these 3 strands and we see them as both independent at the beginning and both as having.
I wasn't suggesting that your project should do that. I understand if you're not.
Okay.
But I'm suggesting that's what we should be doing as research. That's what our future project should look like.
Yeah, I would also be doubtful if that can be done. So, how to deal with the different truth claims? I think that is what I was one of the things that I was trying to say at the beginning. It is very hard to align them, and this starts with the perception of the scientists or the researchers of themselves. So the modelists, as a rule of thumb, have a very, very different perception as to what their work is and what they do and what the effect of their work is. For example, that models really work as agenda setting, as given an impact on, for example, initiatives, making people work, something that's not so very close to, in my experience, to the thinking of the people that model. And on the other hand, the people that work on initiatives, they often do not so much have this idea of, they have the idea of scaling up, but not the very broad picture, maybe. So yes, that's something to really work on, and it connects to what Anne said about embedding and more direct linkages. Because of the different worldviews and the different approaches that people take, it really takes a lot of iterations. And I think it will need a lot of discussions before we really arrive at a more integrated approach, really. So I think we will be lucky if we have something like approximate to that at the end of the project.
Well, first of all, I was really excited about this paper. When I read the title, I was really happy with, this is the place I really want to be. Revolution and Evolution, Grassroots Initiatives, Social Change and Conflict by Liz. So I thought that was a very relevant topic. And let me start by explicitizing what I'm really happy about is that in the paper you start by saying that you actually want to question the extent to which these local actions are made out to be post-political or apolitical. And I was really excited about that because that's often the image they have, but we can question that. And then I think also in your presentation in the paper, more could be made of questioning that. And on the one hand, they are apolitical and post-political, but there is also the question what's political, and maybe go beyond this party politics idea of political. So really look at when you put a solar panel on your roof, how can you see that as a political act? And I think there's some interesting literature that could really help here. And like somebody already mentioned, Adrian Smith about his radical niches and the translation between niches and regimes. Bono Pell's work on dialectics between niches and regimes. I think this could be interesting work. Then I thought it was interesting that you state that in the local initiatives that you observe, there was actually very small role for technology. And I thought that was interesting that to me it seems contradictory to, for instance, eco-villages or community energy projects that I have studied, where technology plays a very big role, and they are community-based, local, low-carbon initiatives. So I think maybe this is more a selection thing than that it's a general thing for all local communities. But it is a specific type of technology, so it's low-tech. So that's something to look further in. And then the last point is, I notice you use the term transition initiatives to refer to transition towns initiatives, and Arts uses the term transition initiatives to refer to initiatives that contribute to transitions generally. And there is moreover a kind of a general confusion: grassroots innovation, community-based, bottom-up, social innovation, civil society, third sector. And I really hope that we can, as this group, we can kind of start to not define, but more like kind of agree on certain dimensions and things that can make this discussion a bit more, less going in Babylonic vicious circles. So that is something that I hope your paper can also contribute to. That's it?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot, Flor. And Reach is super.
I always get to be the last one before break. So I enjoyed this paper very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to read it. And I liked very much the idea of local action as challenging larger scale political power, but was delighted as well that you raised the specter of devolution in that as well, because I mean often these sorts of community-based initiatives can be stand-ins for larger power sources walking away and all that implies. So a few questions that I had about it that we can talk about over perhaps a long period of time. First of all, the idea of whether sort of consensus, even sort of a very modest consensus within these communities, is a realistic goal. And even not simply that, but does sort of tying to a consensus approach in some way limit the scope and potentially change the process of what might be accomplished in these kinds of initiatives. And so I was struck actually with the connection, Flora, with your paper, the idea of potentially trying to use a very like a deep narrative approach in terms of the process of wrestling with consensus in this set of processes. So that was one general comment. Some sort of basic questions that I had. One is whether these communities and their efforts that are self-consciously part of this larger social movement are different in some very fundamental ways from communities that might be engaged in similar kinds of practices but aren't self-identifying with a larger movement and in terms of sort of aggregating it up into something bigger, and sort of how would that level of consciousness of being part of that potentially affect the kinds of things that they do. So how would it matter? How might they change or adapt their practices? And I think part of that, what had me curious, and we talked about this briefly last night on our walk home from the restaurant, really the extent to which sort of seeing yourself as embedded in this network can facilitate certain forms of peer-to-peer learning. Oh, this community is doing this community is doing this. Are we all sort of part of something larger that we can learn from each other in ways that we might not be able to learn from each other if we didn't identify that way? And so how that consciousness would potentially feed back to inform what's happening in the community itself. I guess I've alluded to this already, but I'm going to come back to underscore it. This idea about thinking about variability in social relations within the communities. This shouldn't surprise anyone, given what you've heard me say already. Again, to what extent? You've got these lovely cases, right? But to what extent? And they're doing something, right? Here's an initiative that's happening in a community. But it would be interesting to drill down a little bit more to see, to what extent the particular project really represents, a key or the key priority within a community, and for whom. So, there's so much of, again, we talked about this too, but we sometimes tend to get all dewy-eyed when we use words like community, and the idea that somehow people are in agreement about priorities. And so it would be really interesting to look at sort of who are the community actors that are shaping these. So there's that, and I think I'm almost done. I guess just sort of one other set or sort of data that might be interesting to look at. I don't know if you have access to it or not, but it's wonderful to do the interviews and analyses for how the participants and the players are viewing their roles, what they think they're doing, what they're accomplishing. But whether some of that might be matched with more arm's length data in terms of outputs, in terms of how community, certain aspects of these communities potentially change over time. Yeah, what's the evidence? Yeah, besides sort of your perception that you've made a difference, what's some additional evidence or not in that area? I guess I'm again sort of in contrast. Am I done? Okay, one last thing. In contrast to you guys, I wasn't actually surprised at the lack of technology because I mean some of these things are, to me, are difficult to scale, and so I think to have some idea of what the scale of communities are that allow them the capacity to do certain things and not others would be important to engage as well. Sorry.
No, great. I have to give time. Thank you. Thanks both. Busy.
Right, thank
Easy,
you.
right?
Lizzie.
No, easy is easy now.
Oh, is he? Okay. Thank you. Yes, always nerve-wracking to hear what people think. And I should stress that these ideas I'm very much at the preliminary stage. So apologies for it being a very rough draft of what I was thinking about. So can respond to one thing from Flor. Political and apolitical. Yes. Since writing that, I was at a conference where I went to a session and it was all about what is political, and somebody said the very act of community is political, and went to Roncière and Mouffe and people like this. So the idea, whereas we've tended to think of community as being apolitical because there is consensus and all this kind of romanticism, that I need to go back and look at the literature and actually see, oh no, maybe community that's where the tension, but it's just at a completely different level and different scale. So yeah, thank you for that. I think that could be made stronger. The technology, I'll have to go and think about that. And see how it varies again across our case studies. Again, some will be, and it depends what you call technology. I mean, we have a bike thing in Rome, and so is a bike a technology, or are we looking at new technologies? Or so yeah, that's worth thinking about. And from Richard. Yeah, who are the community actors engaged in this activity? So I'll go to a local group. It's not particularly low carbon, but it's looking at the green spaces within the village that's next to mine. And generally we meet once a month for one evening, and there are 13 of us for a village of 3,000. So yes, is how representative of that? We're probably all nearer 50 than 40. And yeah, so there is something about who's involved. And then I guess, does that affect the technology? Does that affect the kind of issues they get involved in? Are there other groups operating that are looking at other things in that area? And I'll come back and speak to you about the arm's length data, because I'm not sure what you're referring to there. So
what other
yeah.
indicators of success might there be besides
Oh,
small?
okay, yeah, okay. Right, but yeah, thank you. It's been useful.
So we have 4 minutes. I think to go for lunch. So I would like to ask if there are any other questions or points or things that we would like to, in general, address. I mean, we have these 4 minutes. Let's use them, because.
Yeah, I had one thought that relates to various talks. That is something like, I would call it an ecosystem of initiatives. So how do initiatives relate to each other that they have a certain function and an overarching goal? For example, I think about the food sector, there are, for example, vegan initiatives that they don't want to have to do anything with anybody who is eating meat, but they develop some kind of new lifestyles and new recipes and so on. And there's the Vegetarian Monday, who has kind of a bridging function to masses. So, and they have, in my perspective, different roles in a transition to a different food regime. So is that somehow captured by your research, for example, in arts?
Okay. My comment is I just came from the Permaculture International Conference, and there were Rob Hopkins from Transition. There were also people from Gen, and what they all shared was that not only the initiatives were developing much faster than even the people that are trying to foresee and have a global vision could, And even transition is not even now rooted on climate change or economic crisis or even community building, which was their last tag. Now Rob Hopkins said that they're just doing because it's much better to do it and it's fun. So they are really detaching from a way of responding to the system, but just because they want to create the life that they want. So this is really also a paradigm shift within the initiatives. The other thing I also want to mention was that they are creating their own research networks. I mean, Ecolise is also managing to bridge that, although Ecolise is mainly a network of networks of grassroots or community-based or whatever initiatives. It's linking with universities. But even within themselves, there are practitioners, researchers. They're trying to see how to do science that is beneficial for them. And of course, all the researchers are also to see how can we help to do that, but also that it provides information that's good for research, for the sake of research communicating with policy making. So all of this is going on, but also all these technologies are also developing at an incredible education. I mean, people show did some presentation that I was like, I didn't even know that existed. So yeah, just to leave this information here because I think it's really useful because a lot of things is happening and developing really fast. Okay.
I'm jealous you were in the permaculture conference.
Oh yeah, I picked that question. Thanks, that's a good one. Ecosystem of grassroots initiatives or transition initiatives. Two points on that. First, it makes me feeling that I think you have very well listened and understood what we do with arts because we look at the system as such, not only at a single initiative, but I think we just explore that. And that's interesting. And it came as a surprise. And if you look at this, where's the biggest dynamic in? It's definitely the food sector. And I think we cannot study that deeply within arts. But I think if you would like to learn what comes after single, small, tiny initiatives acting on their own at the city level and how they develop if there's a community co-evolving, being in competition to each other. I think from what we learned from arts, the food sector would be the one to start with. Because, I mean, if you look at our mobility sector, yeah, we have this car sharing and the bike sharing initiative. Yes. So, I mean, you can really clearly see what happens in the city. But the food sector is much more diverse, much more entry points, much more things coming up and co-evolving. And there's really a dynamic I think we need to understand also in relation to maybe the supermarkets and the other things. So I don't know if we call it ecosystem of things, but that's exactly, I think, where we should look at. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcus. And Walter. Hot question from you.
Right. I feel slightly uncomfortable between now and lunch, and my little question is going to be very short. It's just less a question, more of a statement. We are all researchers. That means under research ethics, we should all be objective. I think within that domain, I think it would be far easier if we were looking at astronomy as research as being objective. I think if we do social research, and particularly if you're doing work on sustainability and promoting transitions, I think it is our duty, and I'm just putting this out as an assertion rather than as an empirical argument. It is our duty to support sustainable development. That is an ethical imperative that I think is argued in many different papers before, and therefore understanding the logic of change is just the first thing. I think in a way when we talk about sustainable development, we want to change the world. And watching how the world is changing is just the first step. And I think we need to be careful to not just have this as a first step, but also as a second step and as a continuing step, because even though we are objective researchers, we still have an ethical duty, I think, towards positive and constructive engagement with the sustainability agenda.
I agree. Well, I don't think we go for lunch any sooner.
So you say we should be objective, I say we should be reflexive.
Yes.
Different.
I have
2 more statements, and then we really go 3, and then we go for lunch, but we really go for lunch.
I'm actually going to suggest that we have a bit of this discussion toward the end of the day. Because there's actually some rather interesting points coming from this, and having it now is simply not a sensible idea. So if we could hold this, Nikki, for the plenary, I would really appreciate it.
Okay, that's great. So I think I should be facilitating the thing to make sure that we do have the time. No? And be very strict with timekeeping so as to make sure we have time at the end for this. Okay, that's a common agreement. Okay, you will love me also after keeping time. Okay.